All right, hey, welcome to MS101 Lesson 10 on the Introduction to Army Leadership. My name is Captain Silver Beatty, and I'm an APMS at the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. Now, before we even start, take a moment if you'd like, go ahead and scan that QR code. It's going to take you to a live website version of this exact same presentation that may be a little bit more updated depending on when you're actually watching this video. So today's lesson is built off of the 2024-2025 school curriculum. So if you're watching it a little bit later, there may have been some updates. I may have made some changes to this presentation. So scan that. The other thing with that is that there's some embedded links and videos, some other outside resources that are actually clickable when you have that presentation pulled up on a phone or on a laptop. So you have a little additional access to some more in-depth learning materials. And the only other thing before we get started is go ahead and take out a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, or even open up a Word doc on the side, because this particular lesson has a lot of information in it that you may want to take notes on for future understanding, or even maybe some midterms or finals that you might have in your class if you're watching this as an ROTC cadet. But honestly, just having a lot of these notes, because there's so much information, could truly be helpful for you in the future. So like I said, this particular lesson has some additional stuff linked into it. The biggest one being that Intro to Army Leadership Read Ahead. Now this is just an additional resource that goes really deep into detail, more detail than I can cover in a YouTube video for you, but does kind of explain a little more about what we're going to talk about. So I encourage you to pull that open, read some of the stuff that's in there from Army Doctrine, just to gain a little more understanding in some of your free time maybe. So with that, let's just jump right into it. We know that today we're going to be talking about leadership, right, and Army leadership. Now that's written right into our main ideas about ROTC, right? Our leadership and excellence. It's one of our focus words that we talk about in ROTC. So this is a really important lesson. We're going to talk about how we kind of mold that, how we model it, how we work off of that, and what kind of is entailed into the idea of this leadership concept, right? So we're going to do some discussion thoughts. I truly do want you to take a moment through all of these think about it slides that we're going to go through and truly go into your own self-reflection on the questions that we have, the questions that I'm going to ask you, because diving into your own past experiences with leadership is going to play a huge role in understanding the Army leadership requirements model that we're going to talk about in the future parts of this lesson. So with that, my first question is going to be, have you ever considered how you personally go about leading others? Have you been in leadership positions in the past, maybe captain of an athletic team, the president of some sort of club that you were in high school? Are you considered in a leadership position maybe at church or even within your own home? Are you the oldest sibling? Is there any time in your life that you've led others, and have you thought about how you actually go about that? And then the next question here is, if you've actually gone through and considered your personal leadership style, what have you found out about yourself during that analysis? Have you learned that maybe you're more of a go-getter when it comes to leadership, or do you have more of a quiet style? Now reflect on that just a little bit, and then let's consider why it might be important to provide organizational leaders with an actual leadership model that they can follow and kind of strive to reach, such as the ALRM, or the Army Leadership Requirements Model. Why is it important for us as leaders to have a model to follow? So now that we've got a little bit of an understanding of what we're going to talk about today, let's talk about what I want you to know by the end of this lesson. So the big one, I want you to be able to define Army leadership, not just leadership in general, but Army leadership. And then when we go through this model, this Army Leadership Requirements Model, I hope that by the end of your time with me, you can actually identify what we call the attributes and the competencies that fall under this ALRM idea. And don't worry, we're going to talk pretty in depth about all of those. So, what do you think the Army is going to require of you as a future Army leader? And I want you to just start thinking of some traits, some things that you can do, things that the Army wants you to be able to do. maybe things that characterize you, your own personality traits. What will the Army actually require of you as a future Army leader? Now that list is going to be long, right? Maybe some ideas are popping into your head right now. Maybe you even pause this to start writing out a list. But it could honestly take me about 3 or 4 class lesson times to really discuss everything that the Army is going to require of you. And we could come up with a lot of different words. But we'll discuss some main points here throughout this lesson. So let's start with leadership and Army leadership itself. So we know that by definition, leadership is the activity of influencing people. And to do that, we provide purpose, direction, and motivation. So we give the big why, we give the how to the why, and then we give some extra motivation to really encourage our people to want to reach that purpose. And when we do this, we have a better time and an easier time accomplishing the mission and thereby improving our organization. So that's that definition of leadership. Now, an Army leader themselves, you can see those kind of play hand in hand together, right? They look very similar. So we say that it's anyone who, by virtue of assumed role or assigned role, assigned responsibility, so either informal or formal, they inspire and influence people. And they also provide that purpose, direction, and motivation to help accomplish that mission and, you got it, improve the organization. So there's leadership defined, and then really, truly, in all reality, an Army leader is anyone who does that leadership right there. I want you to focus on a few words here. Influencing. Now, I'm not talking TikTok or Instagram influencer, but if you do really look at that idea of being like a social media influencer, it's a big deal, right? They have the capacity to really get people to change or think their way or do things that they do, right? So they kind of lead by example, whether it's good or bad example. What they do, their followers tend to want to do, or they're at least interested in what they're doing. So influence and being influential is a huge part of leadership. Now, 3 more words I want you to focus on are purpose, the big picture, the direction, kind of the guidelines and the instructions for getting to that big picture, and then motivation, which also kind of plays into inspiration, right? How do we motivate our people to want to follow us? How do we motivate people to want to accomplish whatever the task or mission is at hand? And then how can we take that forward to improve our organization? So those are the key words that I want you to focus on when it comes to leadership itself. Influence, purpose, direction, motivation, and then improving the organization with some inspiration. All right, so let's think about this. What role does a leader actually serve in the Army? Why do we have leaders? Why is the Army hierarchy developed and structured in a way that every element, every unit, every organization within the Army has a leader? Well, they're expected to serve the American people and protect the enduring national interests while fulfilling the nation's military responsibilities. And that's a pretty broad way to explain the role of a leader, right? I think we can take that down even further to a leader just serves the Army, does what they're supposed to do. We already know that the Army serves the American people. So a leader is really just the face of that service, right? And at all levels, we go from team leader, who leads a group of 4, including themselves, all the way up to our Army Chief of Staff, right? Who is the leader and the face of the entire Army. On the enlisted side, you have, the Sergeant Major of the Army, the highest ranked enlisted person in the entire Army. That's a big face for the Army. But when we look down at the hierarchies, if you watched some of my, the US Army video, it really explains how every level, every element, every unit, every level of the Army organization has a leader attached to it. So there's some big roles right here. This is that broad role, but there's also a lot of other little roles. Really, the biggest one, in my opinion, is taking care of their people. That's the biggest role that a leader serves, is taking care of their people, because everything here in the brown is going to fall into line if we're doing that. So when we talk about taking care of our people, how do we influence? What goes into actually being influential? Well, we know that influence is known as really just persuading people to do what's necessary, right? It entails more than just passing along orders and telling people what to do. We actually use words and we use personal examples. And that way we can inspire that purpose. We can provide that direction. And when we need to, we can provide that motivation as well. So influence, kind of all encompassing of those parts and that definition of being a leader and that leadership in general. All right, so now let's think about this. How can a leader provide purpose for their subordinates? How can they provide, that big picture, that context, the reason for getting things done? Well, we do it in several different ways, right? So first, we can convey that purpose through direct means. So we request things, we direct people to do things, or we give orders. That's one way, and sometimes we have the purpose kind of underlying within those requests, directives, or orders. But even bigger and more important is leaders need to inspire their subordinates to do their best. And we do that by instilling that higher purpose, the higher reason, the big picture, which rises far above our own and our subordinates' self-interests. We need to be able to explain why something should or must be done, and again, provide that context whenever we can. So really that comes down to being transparent. I think of this as an example of if you tell a toddler to do something, right? I've got 3 kids. So I've got a 5 and a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old. If I tell my 5-year-old to go do something, what's one of the first things he says? The first word that comes out of his mouth. But why, right? But why? And they always want to know the why. Well, it doesn't just change when you become an adult. You still want to know the why. And when you give that why, a lot of times it creates more of a buy-in for our subordinates. And when people have buy-in, they're more committed. They're more likely to actually accomplish those tasks and goals and missions. So it's important to not withhold information and withhold the big picture, especially if it's going to help inspire your people to do what they need to be doing. So that's what it comes down to when we're talking about providing purpose for our subordinates. So when it comes to that, we also know that giving direction and guidance is important. So how do we explain the relationship between giving direction and then delegation? Well, it kind of comes down to anybody can give direction, right? But delegation is normally executed by leaders or someone that feels empowered to delegate. And what is delegation? That's taking your responsibilities or things that have been pushed down to you and then fanning that out amongst your subordinates. So delegating, empowering them, giving them more pieces of that pie of the overall mission that you're trying to accomplish. So you can just tell people all day long to do things, but delegation just looks a little bit different, right? So now we're going to talk motivation. What are some ways that leaders can supply motivation? And when you're thinking about this answer, think about ways that you are motivated. How have leaders, coaches, professors, teachers in the past, your own parents, grandparents, other guardians, how have they motivated you to get things done? And something tells me not every single leader in your life has given you the same type of motivation, which means that not all motivation has actually motivated you, right? So what are some ways that leaders can do that? What are some ways that we can then use that to improve an organization? So a lot of things that we as leaders can do that actually change things, make positive change, because that's, part of this being in the Army and the stewardship of the profession. We are constantly striving to improve down to the smallest element up to the largest element, the big Army. We're constantly striving to improve that, right? And keep it modernized and keep it up with the times. So in order to do that, we can take the current situation and then identify negative trends that could be improved. So for example, when you take company command, or any kind of command really, you take what we call the command climate survey and you push it out to your entire element. So when I was in company command, we initiated this command climate survey that went out to all of my soldiers about a month into my command. So they fill out this long survey. It's got a lot of in-depth questions about the current culture and climate within the organization, things that they have issues with, how they feel about these different trends or training or just all these different blocks. Then the commander receives that command climate survey, and a good commander will read through that, read through the results, and take that to make positive change. And then months down the road, they'll do it again to see if their changes have made an improvement within their own organization. And hopefully it has. So when you get to this point, take the command climate survey, or whatever it might be called at that point, seriously. Take your results, take it with thick skin, and use that to improve your own company or battalion or platoon as best you can. And then with that, how do leaders get results? Now, get results is considered a competency that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But how, if you could answer that question, how can we visualize a leader actually getting results, and what do they need to do to get there? Think about that a little bit as we move forward. Now go back to your past just a little bit. We're going to talk about some influence. I want you to think about some of those leaders that you've had in your life that you've really admired, that have actually influenced you to change, be different, grow, develop yourself. What qualities did they have? What qualities did they have that you admired, and why did you admire that? And why were they able to influence you? Now, the answers to that could be a very broad range, right? So I know for me, I've really looked up to people who are confident, that are enthusiastic, that have been able to get me to buy into what they're quote unquote selling, right? So certain professors you might have might be a little bit more enthusiastic, might seem like they actually care about the material that they're teaching and be passionate about it. You might have some others that are just very lecture-based, that are just there because they have to be. It might at least be coming off that way. Might not necessarily be the case. Maybe you had a coach that was really quiet, had that quiet leadership style, and you enjoyed that quality. For me, I preferred coaches that were loud, that clearly backed up their players, that got into it and really pushed me to be better in a loud way. So those are some qualities that I've admired. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the same qualities that you would admire in a leader, but it's good to be thinking about successful leaders that have worked for you in the past, and then start figuring out how to implement some of those own qualities within yourself. All right, so let's talk the Army Leadership Requirements Model. This is also known as the ALRM. You might hear it called the LRM. You might even hear it called the Be No Do model. There's several different ways to describe this, and it looks a little chaotic right now, but I'm going to walk you through it. Hopefully it'll make more sense momentarily. So the way this works is we have 6 attributes and competencies. That's 3 attributes and 3 competencies. Now they're split up like this, half of the pie, right? We've got our attributes on this side of the first black line, and we've got our competencies down here. Now with that, our attributes are who you are, how you could be described. So you're a person of good character. You have presence, you are present. You have good intellect. Those are all things that can describe who you are, and those are right here in the attributes. Then we have our competencies, and these are described as what you do. So they're more like verbs, right? You lead, you develop, you achieve. So those right here fall under competencies, and they're on this half. Now remember, I also called this the Be No Do model, because we can split this in another way where we have half and half for attributes and competencies, but we also split it into 3 sections for the Be No Do. Now this is pretty self-explanatory, but here we've got be a person of character, and be present. And then we have the know, your intellect, right? That plays into what you know. And we have the do. These are the things that you do, like we said, describes competencies. So be these, know your stuff, and do these, leads, develops, and achieves. And you have the all-encompassing ALRM. We're going to dive just a little bit deeper into what all of these attributes and competencies really mean, but it's important for you to understand the difference between the two as far as who you are and what you do, and then be able to identify which ones are attributes which one of these words are competencies. So keep an idea of this. It's going to get even more chaotic in just a moment. All right, so again, we have our ALRM here on the left, right? That pizza or that pie, different kind of toppings on there, split into different ways. And then we have it drawn out a little bit different in a chart on the right. So the difference here, if you look, this right here in the cream color matches character. So they're all nice and color-coded for you. But these here, these descriptions, are actually going to be the true attributes that fall under the category of character. So for instance, to be a leader of character in the Army, we expect you to follow the Army values, have empathy, understand and follow your warrior ethos, be disciplined, and be humble. So all of these fall under character. Now you see this is still split to where we have our B, these two right here, character and presence, our no, we have intellect right here in the green, and our do, we still have all three of these competencies are down here. Then on this side you can see the attributes cover these three and competencies cover these bottom three. So now let's talk presence. What does it mean to have presence in the Army? Well, as an Army leader, you should have and maintain your military and professional bearing. So basically, how you compose yourself. Do you look the part? Do you respect those customs and courtesies? Do you demonstrate those on a regular basis? And then our fitness. Are you physically fit? Are you mentally fit? Are you emotionally fit? It's not necessarily just our physical fitness, but all of those other portions of fitness that we want in a leader. And of course, this also describes your confidence level. Are you outwardly confident? Do you show the part? Do you at least seem confident? And then your resilience. How well do you come back from tough things? That all plays into being a leader with presence. Now we move into this no section right here, the intellect, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. We know our stuff. But intellect itself actually encompasses quite a bit more than just that. So we talk about being a leader that has mental agility. You're able to think through multiple different things at once. We talk about our judgment. Do you have sound judgment? Do you make good decisions and sound judgment calls? Are you innovative? Can you think of outside of the box ideas for accomplishing a mission or doing a training exercise? Do you have interpersonal tact? Are you able to work with others, essentially? And this plays a lot into emotional intelligence as well. Can you understand when to be the loudest person in the room and when to be the quiet one in the room? And then, of course, with the knowledge aspect, your expertise level. And this is going to be designated on a whole bunch of different things. And in ROTC, we know that our MS3s especially are evaluated on all of these. So when it comes to expertise, think about, do you know the squad mission? Do you understand how to do an attack? Do you understand how those warfighting functions work? That's where your expertise is going to play in. Now let's move over to the do portion of this model, or our core competencies. So our competencies, again, leads, develops, and achieves, are split into these blocks here. So when we talk about being able to lead, we're saying that you can lead others. And that means people actually look to you as a leader. Like they see you, they visualize you as being a leader. So it's not necessarily just being told you're the platoon leader of this mission. It's also this idea that others are going to follow you. Now, do you build trust? If you watch the Army profession and the 5 key characteristics of the Army profession, you know that trust is a central part of that. So that means, do you build trust with other people? Do your peers trust you? Do your subordinates trust you? Does your leadership trust you? This is very important. Are you showing that you can build trust by doing the right things to have people want to be able to follow you? Extending influence, this is a little bit of a complicated idea sometimes, but it's really just, can you influence outside of your initial organization? So do you do things that can influence people that you don't actually formally lead? Leading by example, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Are you telling people to do things that you're not willing to do? Then you're not really leading by example. Are you telling people to be at PT but you're not showing up? It's not really leading by example. So we're looking for that in a leader also. And then biggest of all in this one is communication. And this involves communicating up and down the chain, not just to your subordinates. So communicating to your peers, having a good open set of communication, that's all part of this idea of leading. Now develops. This one's pretty important. One, we're looking for people that actually prepare themselves. Are you doing the additional studying for a specific exam in ROTC? Are you preparing yourself by looking over read-aheads before your lessons? Are you preparing yourself by being at the gym and getting ready for that ACFT that you're going to have this semester? Do you create a positive environment? Are you enthusiastic? Do people want to be around you? Or are you the kind of leader that you walk into a room and people want to get away? Is there a lot of drama that follows you? Or is there just a lot of esprit de corps and people that are excited and proud to be around that environment? So that's talking about creating a positive environment. Developing others, we know this falls under the same idea of stewarding the profession, right? So stewardship involves that leader development. Are you giving other people the chance to learn and grow with you? Are you confident enough in your plan that you can trust that an MS2 might be able to build your terrain model for you? Are you going outside of class hours to teach the MS2s or the MS1s everything you know? And that's what we're looking for specifically in like an MS3 if you're being evaluated. But ways that you can do this as an MS1, you can develop your own classmates. Is there a specific concept in this curriculum that you've really grasped onto, like land navigation, but you have a classmate that's really struggling with understanding the math of converting GM angles? Well, are you taking some time to develop them and be a good mentor or maybe a peer tutor for them? That's where you can see an example of developing others. And then, of course, being stewards of the profession, this really is just, are you striving to make the organization better? And are you being a good face of the organization? And then achieves, this big one down here, that's not just passing a mission and accomplishing a mission, right? It actually entails all of this. So we're enveloping this idea of getting results. You actually get results when you're told to get results. You can anticipate problems that could come up. You integrate tasks, roles, resources, and other priorities, and you're able to kind of delineate those and bring them all together in a way that makes sense. Are you improving your performance and the performance of others? Are you giving feedback? And also on top of this, are you able to receive feedback? Are you seeking out feedback? Are you executing what you're told to execute? If I tell you or ask you to create a squad roster by this time, are you actually making it happen? And then, of course, adapting. This one's big, and in your MS2 year, you're going to learn all about adaptive leadership. But are you able to adapt to the environment? Are you able to adapt to changes in your plan? And are you able to do it, along with this professional bearing and resilience, are you able to do it in a way where you can compose yourself, take a breath, make changes as needed? So that's a really in-depth explanation of how all of this plays together into this small pizza pie. But it's important to understand what all of these little attributes and competencies actually mean. So here's a version of this that maybe you can screenshot, take a picture of, basically just exactly the same as the last slide here, but it's a good chance to maybe pause this video, take some notes, write out what each of those different attributes and competencies really mean. So I'll give you a second to pause, write some of these down, and you'll need these for a little bit of a practical exercise that we're going to do momentarily. All right, so let's think about a few more things here. When you think of a confident leader, like they have that confidence about them, what are some characteristics or traits that you expect from them? Now, when you're answering this question in your head, we're also going to talk about being a productive leader. Now, I want you to think with the ALRM of what you can see throughout all of those attributes and competencies that play into this idea of confidence and productivity. So I'm going to scroll back to that last slide so you can see it and work through it. Pause one more time and see if you can figure out or find some of those smaller definitions that play into confidence here. So go ahead and pause here. Let's focus on confidence and productivity. Okay, so when we talk confidence, when I think of a confident leader, I think of somebody who's disciplined. I think of somebody who has that military and professional bearing about themselves. They're physically fit. They're experts. Looking down here, they're experts in what they're talking about. They lead by example because a confident leader leads by example, right? They've prepared themselves, hence why they are confident. They're able to develop others because they're confident in what they know and they want to impart that knowledge on others. And then a confident leader gets results, right? They execute, they make it happen. And then typically, I think a confident leader can adapt well and keep their composure while they're doing it. So as you can see, there's something in each one of these attributes and competencies that plays into confidence. It's not just right here in presence. Now when we think of a productive leader. Well, a productive leader still has to be disciplined, right? So in order to accomplish tasks, you have to be disciplined to take those steps to get it done. A productive leader usually has to be pretty resilient because not every plan goes according to how we want it to. So you have to be able to be resilient and work through those factors that might change things a little bit. Productive leaders typically have some mental agility because they can balance multiple things at once that they're thinking about. They also can extend some influence, right? If you're productive and you're getting things to happen, that could influence people outside of your initial and organic organization. And productive leaders communicate. You have to have good communication in order to make things happen. Now, another one here, they prepare themselves and develop others. That can come into being productive. And of course, if you're a productive leader, you're already getting results and you're executing. You're able to integrate those tasks, additional roles, the resources you have available, and prioritize everything in a way that makes things happen. So it's just an example of how different types of leaders or things that you're looking for in leaders actually have to encompass multiple attributes and competencies to be able to show that they're productive or confident or a million other traits that you could describe somebody as. So I want you to keep in mind, we don't just see formal authority when it comes to leading. Army leaders are selected for a reason, but they're not expected just to exercise this idea of, I earned this rank, I earned this position, now go do what I told you to do. This idea of the ALRM actually defines all those characteristics that the Army wants us as an organization to utilize as leaders and demonstrate as leaders in order to meet the expectation of that authority that they've given us. So keep that in mind, keep that ALRM, that model itself as a way to kind of figure out your strengths and weaknesses and what things you need to work on over the coming years to be the best all-around leader that the Army wants to see. So with that, how can you actually see yourself applying these concepts? Do some things stick out to you as things that you're really good at already that you could apply tomorrow, like teaching one of your classmates something that they're struggling with that you really understand? And then how can we take the ALRM to develop our strengths and weaknesses? And how can we use that to help us become more aware of our own leadership potential? Hopefully knowing these things and kind of getting an idea of all the traits and expectations of leaders in the Army, hopefully seeing that makes you feel a little bit better about being able to understand what you can work on and what you're already really good at. All right, so let's talk leadership just a little bit more and kind of delineate the differences here. How do we see leadership in the Army different from leadership in civilian organizations? Well, that's a big answer here, but ultimately this comes down to our ultimate duty is to lead American soldiers in combat, right? So the challenges might be similar under other conditions, but combat itself actually brings this greater immediate importance of good, solid, confident leadership. So in peacetime, a leader should be able to lead in a style with standards that can be naturally and logically transferred into combat conditions. And combat conditions add that additional challenge of extraordinary stress, as well as even life and death situations. That's the reality of it. So we have to have a solid trust between our leaders and our subordinates, and that can only be enhanced by the conditions of combat. Now, when we talk about in peacetime, we should lead in a style that kind of naturally transfers over to combat conditions. That means that we always have to be ready. So we don't change our leadership style very much because we always want to be ready and confident and trained, and it comes down to that overall combat readiness. Now, the additional requirements of leaders that are granted by your command authority, whether it's direct or delegated, make our Army leadership just a little bit unique from civilian organizations. The biggest one, like I said at the very beginning, is that responsibility for the health, welfare, morale, and discipline of our assigned personnel. We have to be able to answer for how our subordinates live and act beyond just our duty hours. That means we don't just close down at 5 o'clock and are able to come back at 9 o'clock the next day and start caring. We as Army leaders have a 24/7 job. Every day of every year, you are responsible for your people that follow you. And now society and the Army are always looking to leaders to ensure that the soldiers and our Army civilians receive the proper training and care that they deserve, as well as uphold their expected values and, of course, accomplish our missions. So there's the difference between just being a leader in the Army and being a leader over on the civilian side. So there's this idea, right, that we've got on the right, we've got this idea, this model of leadership. So now that you've learned all those things, you've listened to me talk at you through a screen about all of it, I want you to take everything you've learned, take a few minutes, and I want you to write out specific examples of each of those attributes and each of those competencies that you actually wish and want to see in a leader. And then why is that important to you? So there's an example there below. So the attribute of intellect, we're going to use mental agility. So that's the attribute that we're going to focus on. So one of those in those longer boxes, take those. Well, why is being mentally agile important to me? Well, because I think a leader that's mentally agile needs to be able to do that because not all missions go according to plan. So a leader needs to be able to be flexible in their thinking and then offer solutions when things change. So that's my example of an attribute that I want to see in a leader and why that's important to me. So go ahead and pause the video here, take a few minutes, pick one of those words out of each one of the definitions of your attributes and competencies, and write out why that's important to you. All right, I hope you actually worked through that practical exercise or at least took a picture of it. Maybe you'll think about it a little bit more in the future. But we're going to close up here. So now you've listened to 45 minutes of me talking at you. I hope you're able to define Army leadership. Remember those words that I told you to focus on, right? Influence, direction, guidance, the idea of motivation, giving that big purpose, right? All of those are part of that idea of Army leadership. And then, of course, we talked quite in depth about the ALRM. So hopefully by now you're able to identify those attributes of character, presence, and intellect, and the competencies of leads, develops, achieves. And hopefully you have a little bit deeper understanding of what those words actually mean and what we're looking for in Army leaders. So take this idea forward, keep it in the back of your mind because it's going to follow you throughout the entire time in ROTC and well beyond that as an Army leader. Regardless of what field you're choosing, all of these attributes, competencies, these ideas and concepts as a whole are going to make you a better leader. So keep them in the back of your mind. If you have additional questions, of course, reach out to your primary instructor or advisor. Maybe find a high-speed MS3 or MS4. You know, those threes should know these like the back of their hand because they're getting evaluated on them on a regular basis. Talk with some of your classmates. See if you can dive just a little bit deeper even into those attributes and competencies. And if anything, if you have additional questions that people in your ROTC program can't answer, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at silver.beatty, B-E-A-T-Y, at mso.umt.edu. Depending on when you watch this, even shoot a comment in this and I'll try to get back to you. I may no longer be in ROTC by the time you do watch this, but try anyway. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next video.